Good evening to you. For Tilly True, I'm Regan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with this evening's headlines. Moves to overcome the crisis between Colombia and Venezuela. Ministers will meet this Saturday to prepare talks between the presidents. Scuffles outside a court in Caracas as Leopoldo Lopez arrives to hear the verdict against him. And a victory for fast food workers in New York State. The minimum wage is raised to $15 an hour. All that and more right now on From the South. Thank you for being here with us. Direct talks to solve the crisis between Colombia and Venezuela may now be on the horizon. In the last few hours, the government of Ecuador has announced that this Saturday it will host the foreign ministers of both countries as a first step towards a meeting between their presidents. The Ecuadorian Foreign Minister Ricardo Patiño announced the breakthrough in Quito. He said he had spent hours with both the Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his Colombian counterpart Juan Manuel Santos in the past 2 days. Ecuador will host high-level meetings between Colombian Foreign Minister Maria Ángel Holguín and Venezuelan Foreign Minister Delcy Rodriguez to discuss the border issue. Venezuela's foreign minister has attended the United Nations to discuss the closure of Venezuela's border with Colombia. She said she would be talking about the measures taken by the Venezuelan government to dissolve paramilitary and smuggling activities in the boundary zone with Colombia.
5.6 million Colombian brothers and sisters live in Venezuela, and those that have entered have been fleeing violence and poverty. This year, 130,000 Colombians to Venezuela, practically the figure that the world has been shocked by in the Mediterranean crisis and the massive exodus towards Europe. We are no Europe. We are a modest country, and I don't know who will be able to resolve the Mediterranean crisis and where there is a true humanitarian crisis.
She also pointed out that after the border had closed, the amount of gasoline being smuggled out of Venezuela has significantly dropped.
Since we have implemented this measure of closing the borders, the amount of fuel that the country has used has dropped by 3 million liters daily. We have already alerted Colombia to this situation, and we have pointed out that there are norms and laws that have come from public authorities that have promoted this smuggling.
The Venezuelan opposition leader Leopoldo Lopez is in court in Caracas to hear the verdict on charges that he incited violence last year that left 43 people dead. Government supporters and the victims of the violence that Lopez was linked to protested outside the trial, in which a verdict is expected in the next hour. Fist fights had broken out earlier in the day after Lopez's wife, Lilian Tintori, arrived in front of the heavily guarded Palace of Justice, where his trial resumed. One Lopez supporter reportedly suffered a heart attack during the unrest. Government supporter Briseno Lemes said he should remain in prison.
Leopoldo Lopez does not represent anything to us. What we simply want is that he remain a prisoner and pays for his mistakes, because there were many deaths because of him.
United Nations officials called on Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto to take action regarding the forced disappearance of 43 students from the Ayotzinapa Teachers Training College almost a year ago. The call comes among intense public pressure on Peña Nieto after an independent report largely contradicted the Mexican government's official version of events. The Attorney General said that she would order a new investigation. Now we go to Colombia. That's where, in the wake of the National Day of Human Rights, concerns have been raised over the increasing attacks against human rights defenders. In the first half of 2015, the We Are Defenders NGO registered 394 aggressions. There is more now with Natalia Margarita in Bogotá.
A bullet left her with no chance of walking again, but Gloria is part of Women Walking for Truth, a group that has searched for hundreds that disappeared in the wake of a military and paramilitary operation in the city of Medellin. Her hopes have been raised as exhumations in what is believed as the world's largest urban mass grave are underway.
It is a matter of truth, but also justice. For us, it is like a symbolic compensation that has to do with finally unveiling the truth, finding the disappeared, and bringing relief to the relatives of those children and husbands whose lives have been taken by the conflict.
These women are part of those groups and leaders that have publicly received recognition for their dedication to defend human rights, a task that in Colombia implies a great courage.
It is an odyssey to defend human rights, as what we usually face are the economic interests of multinationals, of the government itself, but we also face the armed groups, as well as strong opposition from the oligarchy that want to wipe out and exterminate our territories.
These human rights defenders have been struggling for their territories, many times having to pay a high price for it. Just in the first half of 2015, 69 human rights defenders and political leaders were assassinated, according to United Nations records.
We have lost our parents, our children, and our brotherly campesinos in this struggle, which is usually not acknowledged but rather stigmatized. We are often not recognized as human rights defenders, and instead we are accused of being guerrilla defenders.
The assassinations are usually preceded by a stigmatization that frequently is coming from the state. Now, in the wake of the peace process, the social leaders are demanding the government cease the attacks against those that are the ones working for peace. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogotá.
But Colombia has seen some improvement in the last years. The slums of Medellin, once the city of drug lord Pablo Escobar, are being ameliorated by their dwellers. The mayor's office of Medellin started a series of initiatives a decade ago that focused on once no-go slum areas. Today, their dwellers are helping to create a network of paved paths, vegetable allotments, and drainage canals. The Green Belt will act both as a buffer to contain further slum sprawl and a forested park. Slums are currently home to around half of Medellin's 2.5 million residents. But however, with all this effort, drug bans are still powerful.
I think what has had the most impact in this entire process has been the confidence in ourselves as a community. People who did not believe neither in the state nor in themselves. People here never thought they weren't capable of working on this one day.
Obviously, there are some rules that you know exist but aren't explicit, like don't mess with anyone, don't argue with anyone, don't fight. If the gangs tell you to leave, you leave. If they say stay, you stay. It's about maintaining this harmony.
Cuba will continue to deepen education ties with the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. It will also continue to focus on education in SADR, including the Simon Bolivar High School, supported by both Cuba and Venezuela, and the first high school to be constructed in the Sahrawi Republic-administered Western Sahara. A sparsely inhabited territory in North Africa, most of Western Sahara has been occupied by the Moroccan military since 1975. Grassroots tenant groups are seeking to demonstrate the problems they face, aiming to curb the abuses in the real estate sector, which has been consistently favored by the policies of the right-wing PRO party that governs Buenos Aires City. Telesur correspondent in Buenos Aires, Leo Pobletico Ducci, filed this report.
The housing shortage in the city of Buenos Aires has led to real estate agencies that manage rental properties abusing their position of power, charging high and unlawful commissions for intermediating between landlords and tenants, among other illegal practices.
Illegal practices that have to do with real estate agencies who have doubled their commission rates, with increases of 20% per semester, increases of 30 to 40% annually, and the requirement of a guarantor, a third-party property that you must put down as collateral just to rent a family home.
Grassroots tenants groups and social movements are seeking to shed light on this enormous problem to curb the abuses in the real estate sector, which have been consistently given political preference by the policies of the right-wing pro party that governs Argentina's national capital.
Often we, who belong to the popular sectors of society, naively say that a government like that of the city of Buenos Aires has no housing policy. We believe that it does have a clear housing policy, and it is obviously destined towards financial speculation and in the detriment of the poor, of workers.
This office is trying to see this issue in an integrated way, in order to give the answers required, not only the case of tenants in particular, but also to contribute to what is the creation of public policy in this matter, associated to housing and the right to housing. When there are no housing solutions, it is difficult to have complete health. It is difficult to have complete education, as all issues are associated with the topic of housing.
Renting a home in the city of Buenos Aires costs, on average, 30% of the salary of a registered worker, well above the average of the OECD countries, where the average rental cost is at 21%.
It is especially hard if we're talking about a family where one of the parents earned that family's income, while the other stays at home caring for the kids. The percentage of income destined to rent is enormously high, making it very hard for working class families to actually pay the rent, which is also permanently readjusted.
5 million Argentines turn to the rental property market to satisfy their housing needs. Once in the marketplace, many have no other choice than to bow down to the cruel and difficult requisites laid down by the landlords and real estate agencies. Tenants are slowly starting to get organised and plan to fight back. Leo Politeco-Dutti, Telesur, Buenos Aires.
After Brazil's credit rating was dropped to junk by Standard & Poor's on Wednesday night, the planning minister has said his country will recover its investment grade rating. Nelson Barbosa said that economic growth will return to Latin America's largest economy. Last month, Brazil's finance minister presented the country's first ever deficit budget for 2016. The government wants to raise taxes to cover the gap, but the opposition is pushing for more cuts in public spending.
We are putting in place the necessary measures for fiscal recovery and also to recover economic growth. A continental economy like Brazil, with 204 million people, the world's 7th largest economy, takes some time to react to these measures. But these measures are in operation, and we will adopt new ones if necessary.
And coming up after the break, the trial for Freddie Gray, allegedly killed by policemen, will be held in Baltimore. That's next.
Discover Latin America and the world in our programs. Telesur Reports, The Real USA, the stories behind the tweets. Ataman, Lives, Know Your Body, Open Files. Exposing the conflicts that affect our people. Compelling personal stories and the most controversial events. See it all on telesurtv.net in English. Telesur. Wherever the news, you'll be there. An insight into Africa today. With Bill Fletcher. The Global African, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. The truth behind the power. We lift the lid on some of the world's most ruthless figures. Open file, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
Fast food workers in New York State will get $15 an hour after the state labor commissioner signed the order. Governor Andrew Cuomo was joined by Vice President Joe Biden as he announced the raise at the Javits Center in Manhattan. Cuomo said the goal is to eventually raise the minimum wage for everyone, not just fast food workers. The court trial of the 6 police officers implicated in the death of 25-year-old Freddie Gray will take place in Baltimore. This after the men's defense attorneys fought to have the trial moved out of the city. The attorneys argue that the police officers would not receive a fair trial because of all the media attention the case has been receiving, which they believe would have a manipulative effect on a jury. However, the Chief Deputy State's Attorney Michael Schwartzow slammed the defense's argument as, quote, insulting to the citizenry of Baltimore. The ongoing gun control issue continues in the United States as those in favor held a rally outside Congress in Washington, demanding that strict measures be put in place for anyone desirous of purchasing a firearm. They're specifically calling on lawmakers to make background checks mandatory as a prerequisite to attaining a gun. The father of Alison Parker, a television journalist who was shot and killed while reporting on live television, spoke at the rally.
Oh, we can't take on the gun lobby. That's just wrong. We can, we must, and we will. And that's why I said, after my daughter was murdered 2 weeks ago, I said on national television that we have to do whatever it takes to fix this problem. Whatever it takes to fix this problem.
Although it is a non-binding agreement, the European Parliament is in full support of a proposal developed by EU Commissioner Chief Jean-Claude Juncker to relocate 160,000 refugees currently in Greece, Italy and Hungary, the three countries most affected by the influx of refugees and asylum seekers from Africa and the Middle East. They also support a permanent quota system to deal with future emergencies. The Parliament has also decided to organize a conference that would employ the collaboration of the EU, the United Nations, the United States and Arab states. Members of a coalition of Islamist groups called the Army of Conquest, which include al-Qaeda militants, were responsible for the deaths of 56 Syrian government soldiers as they took over an airbase in Idlib, Syria. That was the claim of a new video uploaded to social media this week, which showed al-Qaeda Nusra Front fighters exploring the Ab al-Duhur air base. The Syrian military refused to comment on the video, saying the base had been evacuated on Wednesday. The highest number of refugees coming to Europe come from war-torn Syria. Correspondent Hazem Abdullah is there to report on the situation.
Under the impact of the photos of people dying and the boats that arrive daily on Europe's coasts, the European Commission has announced that they have recorded more than 800,000 refugees this year alone. The question remains, why now? And what is the reason behind this staggering number of refugees, which the world hasn't seen since World War II?
We see the flow of refugees and their difficulties from Syria to Turkey, then to Greece, the dangers they face at sea and then on to Hungary, Austria and other countries. And we see how expensive the asylum process is for those countries. So we have to ask, instead of pouring money into humanitarian aid organizations, why don't these countries stand side by side with the Syrian government against the main cause of all this, which is terrorism?
International organizations say that the largest number of refugees, 34%, come from Syria. Some analysts see these numbers and timing as a political rather than humanitarian. They say that aim is to increase pressure on the Syrian government and to legitimize a military intervention in Syria under the pretext that the government is unable to protect its people from terrorists.
What is happening today is absurd. The West sees the Syrian crisis as similar to the division of Yugoslavia. What they want is to use the large number of Syrians who are fleeing as a pretext to create secure areas in the north of Syria, saying they cannot accommodate such numbers. The whole issue is politicized, with just a humanitarian mask, especially since the international community isn't helping Syria to face terrorism, in spite of the daily reports of killings and the destruction of our history carried out by terrorist gangs. They are not treating the disease, just the symptoms.
Terrorist activity is the main reason for the departure of Syrians from their country, by spreading fear through beheadings and displacement of minorities. And these extremists are now a threat to the same Western countries that nurtured them. Hazem Abdullah, Venezuela, Syria.
The upcoming Greek elections will be one to watch. The Conservative Party, the New Democratic Party, is currently running neck and neck with the Syriza Party. That's according to opinion polls. And as the polls indicate that there may not be a clear winner come September 20th, the NDP's leader, Vangelis Meimarakis, said that he would be in support of a coalition government with a party on the left. Meimarakis is on record for having said that former Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras had scared potential investors away during his time in power. Syriza, on the other hand, has placed some blame on the NDP for Greece's current economic predicament.
The first party I would turn to would be the one that comes second, because I believe that together we must coordinate and participate in a common effort. If a second party does not want this, I'll turn to the parties which believe in the country's European course and which we can agree on at least to plan a viable long-term government, hopefully with a 4-year term.
The United Nations General Assembly voted to allow the Palestinian flag to fly at the organization's headquarters in New York City. The United States and Israel were among the 8 countries that voted against the Palestinian drafted resolution. Most of the 28-nation European Union were among the 45 nations that abstained, though France and more than half a dozen others voted in favor of the Palestinian resolution after the EU split on the issue. And staying with Palestine, as way of policy, Israeli Navy boats have opened fire on Palestinian fishermen off of the Rafah coast, southern Gaza Strip. Noah Harazin is in Gaza with more.
Israeli gunboats opened fire Wednesday evening at Palestinian fishing boats off the Rafah coast in southern Gaza Strip. Palestinian sources said that the gunfire caused no injuries. However, it created a status of fear and worry among the Palestinian fishermen. Telesur met with Amjad al-Shrafi, the secretary of the Fishermen Association, who stated that the Israeli violations have become a daily act with no media coverage on it.
Israeli attacks have not stopped since the Israeli war in 2014 ended. Israel did not commit to the agreements which were signed previously. More than 8 to 9 violations are documented daily. More than 1,785 Israeli violations against fishermen have been documented by our association since the end of last summer's war, including gunfire or stealing of fishing nets. Israel has not stopped its campaign against fishermen in the Gaza Strip. It considers itself above the law, and this is all because of the irresponsible positions of the human rights associations, which should sue Israel for war crimes and barbaric practices against fishermen in the Gaza Strip.
Meanwhile, Israel has turned its back to a ceasefire agreement that was brokered between the Palestinian resistance factions and Israeli occupation following a 51-day aggression against the Strip in August 2014. Ever since, the Israeli occupation navy has committed systemic attacks against fishing boats in Gaza Sea on a daily basis. Noor Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
Turkey's People's Democratic Party, the HDP, is angered over the deaths of 21 people, some of whom are children, in an operation the government says is aimed at eliminating PKK militants in the Turkish city of Cizre. HDP members tried to enter the city, but were stopped by security forces in full riot gear, brandishing shields. The officers said they prevented the HDP members from entering for their own safety, in an operation which they claim has thus far killed over 30 PKK militants. Cizre has been under curfew for the past week. And now we give you a brief of other stories making headlines across the globe.
And a group of militant anti-fascists committed to opposing the rise of far-right in Britain and abroad, called Antifa, is showing solidarity with refugees entering Germany. They took over a building next to Berlin's Rewe Spree, hanging banners in support of Germany's contribution to the crisis. Germany said they will assist persons seeking refuge from war. However, they will not assist those simply looking to improve their economic lives. Many of the residents of Sana'a, Yemen, have started to flee from the city for fear of deterioration of the security situation and disruption of public services after the recent and severe airstrikes there. The Saudi-led coalition have allegedly dropped at least 250 bombs or missiles on various targets, including residential spots of the group's leaders. Local media reports said current raids have killed at least 100 people so far and injured many more. Russia's top weapons manufacturer, called the Kalashnikov concern, is in the process of formalizing ownership of trademarks across several key product classes throughout the world. The company just formally registered its trademark brand in an attempt to consolidate its global intellectual property rights. The trademark covers arms and ammunition products. France is hosting the United Nations Global Climate Summit, also known as the COP21, that will begin in late November. Attendees of the summit will seek to reach a binding agreement on how to share the burden of capping global warming. Invited guests will include persons of civil society, NGOs and political figures.
After a second phase of refurbishment to the Exhibition Palace buildings, the Lima Art Museum reopened the doors to its permanent exhibition on September 8th. The exhibition holds more than 17,000 works representing 3,000 years of Peruvian art. The pieces range from photography and design to textiles, silver and woodwork. Entrance to the museum will be free of charge during the first 3 days of the exhibition's reopening in order to incentivize museum visits. It's a film that touches on the challenges faced by today's societies, feeling isolated, sexual repression, the lack of father figures, and revenge. In fact, the director of the Venezuelan film entitled Desde Allá said that there is no one overriding message in the film. However, Desde Allá has premiered at the 72nd Venice Film Festival and looks at the life of a wealthy, middle-aged man who becomes obsessed with a young man whom he invited up to his home initially just to strip for him. The director said the film will also look at the stigma of homosexuality in Latin America. Yep, there is more on these and other stories on our website, telesurtv.net/English. From our news teams in Quito, Ecuador, and here in Caracas, Venezuela, for Telesur English, I'm Regan Devines. We'll see you tomorrow.